When ships from Ireland docked in Boston Harbor in the mid-1800s, the air was heavy with salt, smoke, and desperation. Famine had driven thousands from their homeland, whole families packed into steerage, escaping hunger only to find a different kind of struggle waiting on the shores of America. Among them were countless young women, some barely 16, who would become the invisible hands of Boston's Gilded Age, the Irish servant girls. They arrived with trembling hands, clutching rosaries or tattered letters from relatives who had come before them. For many, there was no family waiting. The moment they stepped onto the docks, they were already being watched by employment agents, by wealthy women in black dresses, by boarding house matrons who would place them in homes across the city. Their fate was sealed before they spoke a word. Boston's upper class, with its grand brownstones and glittering parlors, needed servants, and the Irish were cheap, obedient, and desperate. Within days, these girls found themselves scrubbing floors, polishing silver, and caring for children who would never know their names. They slept in tiny attic rooms, often windowless, where the only light came from the glow of gas lamps below. Their employers called them Bridgets, a cruel nickname used for any Irish maid, as if they were all the same. It was meant to erase individuality. One girl could be replaced by another, forgotten without consequence. Bridget broke a plate. Bridget was insolent. Bridget left without notice. The real names Mary, Ellen, Catherine faded into the background of Boston's polished society. For 6 or 7 days a week, from dawn until midnight, they worked in silence. They cooked elaborate meals they would never taste. They dressed the daughters of their employers for dances they could never attend. They stood behind doors as music and laughter drifted. Through the halls, reminders of a world they served but could never enter. Some of them sent their meager wages back home to Ireland, enough to feed families still suffering across the ocean. A few managed to save a little, hoping to one day marry or open a small shop. But for many, the dream of freedom never came. Isolation, exhaustion, and humiliation wore them down. They were strangers in a Protestant city that viewed them as unclean, uneducated, and unworthy. The newspapers mocked them. Political cartoons in the late 1800s depicted Irish women as brutish, red-faced, and clumsy caricatures meant to keep them in their place. The word servant was often replaced with girl, a way of denying them adulthood, autonomy, and dignity. They were not women, they were help, and yet these Irish servant girls kept the city running. They cleaned its homes, nursed its children, and maintained its fragile illusion of refinement. Their labor made possible the wealth and leisure of Boston's elite. Behind every shining ballroom and manicured garden was a woman who rose before sunrise. Her hands raw from lye soap, her back bent from scrubbing. Some of them rebelled in quiet ways. They sang Irish hymns under their breath while sweeping the halls. They left tiny shamrocks carved into woodwork where no one would notice. They passed stories to one another in boarding houses of ghostly banshees, of home, of a green country across the sea. It was their way of keeping something alive that America tried to erase. There were tragedies too, young girls dismissed without pay after being accused of theft. Others exploited or assaulted by the men of the household, their cries dismissed as hysteria. Some died of fever or exhaustion, their graves marked only by a wooden cross and a number. In the city's archives, hundreds of Irish servant women appear only in coroner's reports or hospital ledgers, ghosts in the paper trail of history. But slowly, things began to change. By the late 19th century, many of these women's daughters refused to take the same path. They went to school, joined labor unions, and became nurses, teachers, and secretaries. The Irish maids, who had once been invisible, laid the foundation for the next generation's rise. They endured so their children would not have to. Still, Boston remembers them only in whispers. In the grand houses of Beacon Hill, where tourists now walk through rooms restored to the splendor of the Gilded Age, the servant quarters remain small and dim, reminders of the lives that played out in silence. The women who lived there left no portraits, no diaries, only traces of their existence in census records and worn stair rails smoothed by their hands. They came to America seeking freedom but found servitude. And yet, within that servitude, they built something lasting: resilience, faith, and a quiet defiance that carried through generations. They may have been called Bridget by those who looked down on them, but history knows them differently. as the women who crossed an ocean, survived humiliation, and helped shape a nation that never truly saw them. These were the Irish servant girls of Boston, the forgotten lives behind the polished doors of America's Gilded Age. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, and share to uncover more dark and hidden stories that history tried to forget.